Welcome to our sixth Nexi talk at Money 2020 in Amsterdam. In this session, we'll be talking about the Europeanization of payments with a specific focus on e-commerce. Given the fact that the European e-commerce market is quite complex, we intend to explore what the biggest challenges are and what the best strategies to tackle this market. Our guests to discuss this are James Booth from PPRO. He's head of partnerships there, a company that helps globalize payment platforms. And Omar Haque, the head of group e-commerce at Nexi Group. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, good to be here.
So looking at the freshly published Nexi e-commerce report, it shows that the European e-commerce market is deeply localized and highly customized. Give us your brief opinion and outlook on the development of the European e-commerce market. Omar, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, we've done a couple of things. One is probably what we think is one of Europe's biggest surveys of tens of thousands of consumers to understand preferences, not just in terms of how they pay, but how they end up in e-commerce. Now, a lot of that you can read yourself. Some of it isn't super surprising because there's been a lot of coverage of what's been happening, particularly following on from COVID and other things. But there's two things that really stand out for me. Thing number one is that the once in a generation shift towards shopping online or shopping on the go with your mobile or whatever is here to stay. And so in many countries, particularly ones that were less digital to begin with, the rate of e-com growth is still in the high double digits, 20, 30%. Poland, for example. The other and probably more counterintuitive finding, especially for me being relatively new to Europe, is that payment preferences have become even more local with the acceleration of e-com. And we'll go much, much deeper into this, but this idea that people are becoming more local, even as they're shopping online and maybe even from global brands, is a surprising finding for me.
And James, maybe you again?
I completely agree with everything you said, and I think to add to that, I mean, at PPRO we see a lot of localization and fragmentation within the industry, certainly become more and more localized as things are moving along. But on top of that, as merchants are maturing, as digital commerce is maturing as a whole, one of the key drivers we're seeing is merchants wanting to create a store for one. You know, Amazon went out there and they were one of the first to pioneer. You know, my version of Amazon is very different to your version of Amazon, and we're starting to see that being replicated across the industry. So that's also causing more localization, more fragmentation, and I think that's something we're going to see happening even more and more. And it adds to the complexities that I think we'll discuss a little bit further today.
Yeah, so maybe if you can dig a little more into it, we've just heard that it's very local.
Yes.
But what's the exact trends here?
Yeah. Well, I mean that there's multiple ways to maybe look at it. If we look at it historically, I mean, even on a global basis, there's payment preferences that have varied. I mean, even if you look at APAC, there's e-wallets. You look at Latin America, like cash-based payments used to be very popular. Even within Europe, you know, you look at certain regions, and there's different preferences, whether it's Scandinavia, Southern Europe, Western Europe, etc. Preferences have very been deeply ingrained on a country-by-country level. I think to add to that, a lot of the regulation has probably spurred a lot of competition locally within regions. So a lot of these payment preferences have caused local products to kind of spur up, and you know, there's a lot of consumer loyalty out there, and I think that's driving a lot of the localization and a lot of the loyalty towards these local payment methods and just local e-commerce merchants as well.
Just to give a couple of additional examples, what's really surprising to me is how quickly those preferences change. So, for example, if you're in Germany and I visit Berlin, for example, the checkout and the way the checkout works has to be super transparent. You've got to be very careful about data capture, and then the preference is to pay for what I keep after I've decided to keep it. So buy now, pay later, open invoice, the Kaufhausrechnung, which you know much better than I do, SEPA direct debit, and then at the far end you get Visa and MasterCard. If you cross the border and you just drive an hour east to Poland, everything flips, and 80% of it is paying cash from your bank account before you've even received the goods. And then again, it's not just the payment method preference, but it's how you check out, how the e-commerce site works. And so the same merchant, the same business has got to adapt to these realities as they cross cultures, borders, and different segments.
And are global wallets like Apple Pay and Google Pay going to have an impact in e-commerce like they have in the online world, offline world? Sorry.
I mean, I'm happy to lead that. I mean, my opinion is that I don't think they'll have as big of an impact as they do in the point of sale world. I mean, because of a lot of the factors that we've spoken about. In the e-commerce environment, it's become very localized on a per region basis. And also, I don't think, Apple as an ecosystem, they've relied on Visa and MasterCard in a point of sale environment, and they've got the hardware to match it, and it works quite smooth in that environment. But as soon as you move online, it becomes extremely localized, extremely fragmented. And I think the consumer preferences, and at least in an online environment, the ecosystem's more competitive, and I think consumer preferences will vary quite a lot depending on the region, and I don't think they have as big of an impact in an e-commerce world.
What's your take on that?
I completely agree. If you read the report, we've got a couple of statistics. So picking one country in particular, so in Denmark, which is a bit counter to the overall trend, you see really quick rise of Apple Pay. That's because there's really good issuer support. People are used to using a card, and the local scheme downcourt support's being loaded in. However, if you then again cross borders, you have local wallets that are as good or even better. So in Poland, to your point, with Bleak, you just don't see the rise of Apple Pay online. People are happy using their Polish payment method.
Yeah, and I think to even go a step further, I see Apple Pay doing well, but what we're also starting to see is a lot of these local payment methods, be it e-wallets, bank transfer methods, they're starting to explore the point-of-sale environment. So the whole kind of omni-channel discussion is really becoming blurred into a digital-first payments approach. I definitely think we'll see a lot of these local payment methods starting to enter the physical space and actually competing with Apple Pay in that environment over a kind of a mid to long term.
What else can shift the balance between local, regional, and global dynamics? Is it regulation? Is it consumer trends? What has the biggest influence here?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really all about consumer preferences and consumer trends. I think that's going to drive a lot of the behavior that we're going to see, certainly between us and the ecosystem and on the merchant front. Regulation, I think, helps drive competition. It helps level the playing field, which will probably further drive fragmentation. But for me, the consumer preferences and where consumer adoption is occurring is going to be one of the main drivers in my opinion, and that's what we see at PPRO quite a bit.
I think the challenge for the ecosystem, for partners and for merchants, is unfortunately the world's just getting more complex. And I think really well-intentioned initiatives and fast-growing providers, so things like EPI, Klarna's explosive growth around the world, is only adding to the complexity. So it becomes the 10th way to pay. One of my favorite examples is my daughter's 15 now. And so she was on, in this case, a UK website, which I know technically isn't part of Europe anymore, unfortunately. And it was My Pretty Little Things. I encourage you to check it out. The checkout was insane. So she'd ordered a dress. You had Visa, MasterCard, American Express, PayPal, Klarna, Afterpay, Satispay. There were 8 buy now, pay later options. And I'm a payments guy, and I was completely lost. So this is only going to get worse over time as everyone is jockeying for position. And unfortunately, regulation in the short to medium term is going to add to the complexity, not simplify it.
Yeah, I think it's going to get more fragmented and more complex in the near term. So I completely agree with you.
Payment methods are for consumers, but from a servicing the merchant perspective, what does it mean to be local?
Yeah, I mean, this is what PPRO does. This is our bread and butter, is going local and helping other providers out there support their merchants on a local level. So when looking at merchant services on a local level, it's not only about the consumers and about payment methods, it's about really localizing things like obviously having local regulation, having local licenses in place, having the right collection accounts in place, having local customer service, local contracting, so you can really service those merchants in their local environment and feels like they're effectively buying their merchant services from a bank around the corner, which is ultimately what we're all trying to achieve.
What is the right approach to winning in Europe as a PSP? Omar, maybe you want to start?
Well, so the short version is you have to be the local expert. You have to go deep. What we're finding is a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work for all the reasons that James mentioned and the reality of trying to do business locally. You've got to take into account different tax regimes, different settlement accounts, different currencies, different consumer preferences, different checkout behaviors, and that means you have to go deep.
Yeah, completely agree. And also, I think you've got to go deep and wide at the same time. I think we've seen a lot of payment players out there trying to build a full stack solution all in-house. And actually, as we've discussed, things are getting more complicated, things are getting more fragmented. I think we need to partner up with the right players in the ecosystem to build the best-in-class front-end products.
Quick question, short answer. How will e-commerce develop going forward? What do you think? Maybe James, you want to lead it?
Yeah, that's easy. It's going to get more complicated. It's going to grow. I think I'm seeing really good movement in the industry. The fact that competition is increasing and it's easier to build solutions these days means we're going to see a lot of providers pop up in the short term. But yeah, they're not all going to survive. I'm sure there'll be some consolidation around the corner. But yeah, I still see it growing extremely well over the next few years.
Yeah, I'm a long-term optimist and a short-term paranoid mess. So I have no idea what's going to happen in 2022, post-COVID, war in Europe, which I never thought I would see in my lifetime, macro effects. So I'm not an economist, and I'm definitely not a geopolitician. So let's see what happens in 22. I'm hoping for a safe landing into 2023. But in the long term, economies will grow, people will prosper, knock on wood, and the rise towards omni-channel shopping wherever you happen to be just means that life will get more complex, but ideally better for consumers because they can do what they need to do at their point of interaction.
Well, thank you very much, Omar and James, for this very inspiring conversation. I think two things have become obvious. First of all, there's no way around pan-European solutions for e-commerce because internationally active companies want and need uniform solutions somehow with the specific local solutions as well. And secondly, the shopping and payment habits of consumers require in-depth local knowledge, as said, in order to serve merchants and consumers appropriately. Those who cannot keep up will likely fall behind. I don't know if you agree. Our next talk will be later today at 3 o'clock on the topic of customer value management. Thanks for joining, and if you
the couple.
Very quite.
I know it's different.